12 Australian suburbs are showing every structural warning sign that property analysts, banking economists, and real estate researchers associate with serious, sustained value corrections. And if you are holding property in any of them right now, the next 2 years could be the most financially consequential of your life. From high-density towers already hemorrhaging equity, to outer fringe master-planned estates where infrastructure promises have quietly evaporated, and coastal holiday markets where a new wave of legislation is forcing a mass seller exodus. These are the 12 markets where the real data tells a story that the headlines are not. Stay with me to the very end, because after we work through every single one, I'm going to tell you exactly where the smart money is repositioning right now. There is a sentence that gets repeated at every dinner party, every family gathering, and every conversation about property in Australia. It goes like this: you cannot go wrong with bricks and mortar. It is the most embedded belief in Australian financial culture. We have been told for 60 years that property always recovers, that it always grows, that the fundamentals are always strong, that if you just hold on long enough, it will all work out. And for a very long time, in most places, that was essentially true. But the market that exists in 2026 is not the market that built that belief. Interest rates are in restrictive territory. ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence is sitting near a record low. Victoria's state debt is projected to hit $188 billion by 2028. Generating ongoing land tax hikes that are systematically driving investors out of entire property categories. Melbourne's highest-end properties have now declined for 5 consecutive months. The core logic. September 2024 data confirmed that almost 30% of Australian suburbs had already entered active price correction. And the PropTrack research confirmed 139 suburbs recorded price falls, with 8 suburbs posting double-digit annual declines. The headline that says the national market is up is technically accurate, but the national average is being dragged upward by Perth and Brisbane, while specific suburbs in Melbourne, Sydney, regional Victoria and coastal Queensland are quietly bleeding. The average does not pay your mortgage. Your suburb does. And if your suburb is on the list we're about to go through, the data says you need to understand your risk clearly before you decide to stay, sell, or buy more. Let us pull back the curtain on the 12 markets that are raising the most urgent red flags right now. Number 1. Millers Point, New South Wales. You already know this name if you watched our last video. But the situation here deserves its own deep dive, because the scale of what has already happened in Millers Point is a preview of what could happen in any high-density, premium location where the fundamentals shift. Millers Point is directly under the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It is geographically irreplaceable, historically significant, visually extraordinary. And according to PropTrack's most recent data, the unit median here crashed by 55% in 12 months. $666,353 wiped from the median unit value. How does one of the most desirable locations in Australia lose more than half its unit value? Because location does not override fundamentals. When strata costs are extreme, when body corporate complexities in heritage buildings become unmanageable, and when investors flee the entire unit category simultaneously, even harbour views cannot hold the price floor. And the critical question now is whether this is a one-off or a warning. Darling Point apartments dropped 12% in the same period. Kirribilli fell 11%. The disease has already begun spreading outward from the ground zero in Millers Point. When a 55% crash does not create a buying frenzy, it tells you the buyers who would normally rush in have been priced out or are choosing to wait. The harbourside address promises blue-chip Sydney real estate with irreplaceable scarcity and generational security, but the PropTrack data confirms the highest unit value crash in the entire country in Australia's most historically prestigious postcode in a single 12-month period. And if you think inner-city apartments are unique in their vulnerability, number 2 takes the same collapse risk and applies it to a completely different context. Number 2, Docklands, Victoria. Docklands was supposed to be Melbourne's waterfront renaissance, the central business district fringe location, the modern architecture, the marina views. When the towers went up in the 2000s, it was marketed as Melbourne's answer to Sydney's Darling Harbour, a visionary precinct that would only get better with time. But the reality of Docklands in 2026 is one of the starkest warnings in the entire Australian property landscape. One detailed, independent cost breakdown of a Docklands apartment found these owners are currently negatively geared by approximately $28,000 per year, once land tax, owners' corporation fees, strata management fees, and inflated building insurance premiums are stacked together. $28,000 a year out of pocket on a property simultaneously losing value. Units across Melbourne's central business district fringes, including Docklands and Southbank, recorded price falls ranging from $5,000 to $18,000 in the most recent period, even as the national market nominally grew. And the structural defect crisis, which we covered in full in our Melbourne apartment video, means that many of these towers are carrying hidden special levy bombs that can detonate with 6 weeks' notice to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars per owner. The investor exodus from Victoria following land tax changes has removed the primary buyer cohort for Docklands units entirely. When the investors stop buying, the price floor disappears. The waterfront precinct promises a world-class lifestyle investment at the gateway of Melbourne's central business district. But the $28,000 annual negative gear and the $5,000 to $18,000 price falls confirm. A market where the fundamental numbers no longer work for investors, and first home buyers are the only remaining cohort who cannot see the trap. Because the next suburb shows that Melbourne's unit problem extends well beyond the central business district. Number 3, Chadstone area high-density units, Victoria. Chadstone is best known as the home of what it calls the fashion capital, Australia's largest shopping centre. The suburb built its reputation on convenience, retail access, and solid middle-ring Melbourne location. But the unit market here has experienced one of the most violent crashes in recent core logic data. Chadstone recorded a 33.3% unit price crash in the tracked period, making it one of the worst-performing unit markets in Victoria by percentage. Why? Because the Chadstone unit market attracted a very specific buyer profile, investors who prioritize proximity to the shopping centre and strong rental demand. But when investors fled Victoria en masse following the land tax changes, those same properties had no owner-occupier demand to fall back on. The investor becomes the seller. The investor also used to be the buyer. When the investor leaves both roles simultaneously, there is nobody left to hold the price. This is the structural flaw at the heart of every suburb dominated by investor-grade units, not just in Chadstone, but across every similar precinct in Victoria. The convenient location promises strong rental yields, excellent tenant demand, and proximity to Melbourne's major retail hub. But the core logic data delivers. A 33% unit crash in a market where the investor class was simultaneously the buyer and the seller, and both sides have left the room. And if you think the outer growth corridors of Melbourne are safer because they focus on detached housing, number 4 is going to fundamentally change that assumption. Number 4, Tarneit, Victoria. Tarneit is the archetypical Melbourne outer growth corridor suburb. Massive master-planned estates, 4-bedroom homes on reasonable blocks, affordable entry prices relative to the inner ring, developer display villages on every corner. For first home buyers and young families, it looked like exactly the right answer to the affordability crisis. But the warning signs in outer growth corridor markets like Tarneit are now impossible to ignore. The fundamental issue is structural oversupply. Thousands of new lots are still being released across Melbourne's western and northwestern growth corridors simultaneously. Every new estate that opens is in direct competition with every nearby established property trying to sell. When you are competing with a new land release at a developer's subsidized price with stamp duty concessions, your ability to achieve premium resale value is severely compromised. Beyond oversupply, these suburbs carry deep infrastructure risk. Promised schools, hospitals, train stations, and town centres that were presented as 5 years away in the sales brochure are now 8, 10, or 12 years away. And critics have specifically noted that Melbourne's outer growth corridors have been heavily marketed to new migrants and first-home buyers who do not yet have the local knowledge to fully evaluate the infrastructure delivery gap. When those buyers, many holding large mortgages at stretched borrowing limits, are forced to sell in a market with continuing new supply, the mathematics of getting your money back becomes deeply challenging. The master-planned estate promises a thriving community, world-class amenities, and a smart, affordable entry point into Melbourne's property market. But the infrastructure delivery gap and the chronic oversupply confirm a market where your resale competition is a brand new developer lot at a subsidized price in a suburb where the promised amenities are still more than a decade away. And the next suburb proves that pandemic-era price inflation in regional Victoria is unwinding with alarming speed. Number 5. Kyabram, Victoria. Kyabram is a small inland town in Victoria's Murray-Darling Basin. During 2020 and 2021, city buyers flooded regional Victoria looking for space, affordability, and a simpler life. Kyabram properties that were selling for $200,000 in 2019 briefly hit $350,000 at the peak. But the correction has been savage. PropTrack data confirmed Kyabram units crashed by 33% year-on-year. In a small regional market, that level of price compression means some owners have lost $60,000 to $90,000 of equity in less than 2 years. And here is the structural reality that makes recovery extremely difficult. Kyabram's local economy is agricultural. The local wages that were there before the pandemic buyers arrived are still there. The pandemic buyers have largely returned to the cities, and the remaining pool of local buyers simply cannot support the prices the city buyers pushed the market to. When you add Victoria's ongoing land tax pressure, which makes holding a holiday or investment property in a regional town increasingly expensive every year, you create exactly the conditions for a sustained, multi-year price correction rather than a temporary dip. The regional lifestyle dream promises affordable country living with the pace and space modern Australians are rediscovering. But the 33% correction confirms a market where the city money has gone home and the local income base cannot carry the prices the city money inflated, because the next suburb shows the same pattern playing out in Victoria's coastal markets, with the additional twist of new state legislation making it dramatically worse. Number 6. Mornington Peninsula, Victoria. The Mornington Peninsula is one of Australia's most beloved leisure destinations. Cellar doors, ocean beaches, weekenders. It has been the aspirational retreat for Melbourne's professional class for decades, but something critically important happened to the peninsula's property economics over the last 18 months. Victorian councils began implementing regulations on short-stay accommodation. Hundreds of homes quietly dropped off the Peninsula Shire's short-stay accommodation register as the economics of running an Airbnb became less and less viable. Simultaneously, Victoria's land tax changes meant that owners of holiday homes who previously had no land tax liability on their primary investment, suddenly found themselves with annual tax bills running into the thousands. The result was a wave of forced sellers hitting the market simultaneously. CoreLogic's September data confirmed that 100% of Mornington Peninsula suburbs recorded value declines over the quarter. 100%. Not a single suburb on the peninsula escaped the correction, and PropTrack confirmed a further $4,000 average fall in the most recent 12-month period for peninsula houses, with analysts citing softened investor demand as the primary driver. Is the peninsula structurally broken? Not necessarily, but the specific combination of short-term rental regulation, land tax, and investor exodus has created a correction that is deeper and faster than any pure market movement would produce. The sea change branding promises your slice of paradise with strong short-term rental income to offset holding costs. But the land tax and short-stay regulation deliver a market where 100% of suburbs simultaneously declined when the legislative environment removed the two primary pillars of the investment case. And the next suburb shows that even when infrastructure promises are delivered, they are no guarantee against the fundamental mathematics of oversupply. Number 7. Haymarket, New South Wales. Haymarket is essentially the southern fringe of the Sydney Central Business District, just minutes from Town Hall, from Darling Harbour, from the university precincts. In terms of location quality, it is hard to argue with Haymarket. But PropTrack's modelling, which measures what prices would be if growth trends from the last 5 years continued, found that Haymarket would record one of the biggest price drops of any suburb in Australia. The suburb's dwelling prices fell an average of 22% from 2019 to 2024, to hit a median of $925,000. If that trajectory continued, the median would fall a further $200,000 to $725,000. This is almost entirely a unit story. Nearly all dwellings in Haymarket are apartments, and the fundamental dynamic is the same as Millers Point, Docklands and Chadstone. When international students, overseas investors, and the category of buyer who supports inner-city unit markets shifts or disappears, the floor disappears with them. The central business district adjacent address promises unbeatable urban convenience in the heart of Sydney's most active precinct, but the 5-year price trend and PropTrack modelling confirm a market where proximity to the city centre is not enough to overcome the structural oversupply and the departure of the buyer cohort that built the price. Because the next suburb proves that buying in one of Australia's most famous tourist destinations does not insulate you from unit market collapse. Number 8. Surfers Paradise, Queensland. Surfers Paradise is Australia's party postcode, the Golden Mile, the high-rise beach city. Investors have been drawn to Surfers Paradise units for decades because of tourism demand, ocean views, and what appeared to be a permanently buoyant rental market. But the unit tower market in Surfers Paradise is now facing a convergence of pressures that critics say look increasingly like the Melbourne apartment crisis in its early stages. The buildings are old. A significant proportion of the high-rise unit stock in Surfers Paradise was built in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. The strata levies are rising, sometimes dramatically, as aging infrastructure requires major remediation. Body corporate costs in Surfers Paradise have become a significant deterrent for buyers who do their due diligence. And the Queensland government's ongoing regulatory tightening on short-term accommodation in residential towers is reducing the investment income stream that made these units viable. The view from Level 20 promises a premium holiday investment with strong tourist rental demand and iconic Gold Coast exposure. But the aging building stock, rising strata levies, and short-term rental regulations reveal. A market where the holding costs are rising, the income is being legislated downwards, and the buildings are old enough to present a very real remediation risk. And the next suburb is the most extreme boom and bust example in the entire country. Number 9, Moranbah, Queensland. If you want to understand the single greatest risk in the Australian property market, spend 5 minutes researching Moranbah. Moranbah is a Queensland coal mining town that has been on the most volatile property roller coaster in the nation's history. Over the past 25 years, the median house price has risen 970% from $35,000 to $340,000. That sounds extraordinary until you understand the full story. At the peak of the coal boom, Moranbah houses were selling for over $700,000. When the mining cycle turned, prices crashed by more than 60% in under 3 years. Then the next cycle came, and prices surged again. Now, with global coal demand under sustained pressure from the energy transition, analysts are asking the obvious question about what happens if this is the last cycle. Anyone buying into Moranbah right now is betting on the continuation of the coal market. If a single major mining project is cancelled, wound back or automated, the employment base supporting $340,000 house prices simply evaporates. There are no alternative industries to absorb the shock. There is no demographic diversity to create a secondary demand base. The high rental yield promises outstanding returns from Australia's resource-driven economy, but the 60% crash history proves a single industry town where a change in one corporate mining decision can wipe out years of capital growth in months. Because the next suburb shows that even in New South Wales's booming corridor markets, specific product types carry extraordinary risk. Number 10. Parramatta and Homebush Unit Towers, New South Wales. Sydney's Western Central Business District corridor around Parramatta and Homebush is being marketed aggressively as the future of Sydney's growth. Infrastructure investment, light rail, the Western Sydney Airport. The narrative is genuinely compelling. But the unit tower market in this specific corridor is showing the same oversupply dynamics that have crushed Docklands and Zetland before them. Core Logic and PropTrack data have both flagged Parramatta and Homebush as unit markets facing downward price pressure, driven by rising listings, weaker demand, and continuing new supply from the development pipeline. Independent analysts who mapped the approved development pipeline across the Western Corridor found that the number of units under construction or approved significantly exceeds the realistic owner-occupier demand in the near term. And the investor exodus from this specific type of property, triggered by rising interest rates and tightening serviceability assessments, means the secondary market is competing with discounted developer stock. The Western Corridor narrative promises ground floor entry into Sydney's next great growth corridor, but the oversupply pipeline and the departing investor cohort reveal a unit market where the supply continues to arrive faster than genuine owner-occupier demand can absorb it. And the next suburb is a stark reminder that even cities with strong overall market conditions have specific vulnerability hotspots. Number 11. Darwin Inner City and Central Business District units. Darwin's volatility is legendary among Australian property investors. The city consistently cycles between aggressive boom and severe correction, driven entirely by government infrastructure spending and resources projects. In the Core Logic, September 2024, quarterly data, 51.2% of Darwin's suburbs were already recording declining values, more than half the city declining simultaneously. And Darwin dwelling values subsequently experienced a 0.7% dip in specific quarters of 2025. The fundamental problem for Darwin is the same one it has always had. The city's population is dominated by Defence Force personnel, government contractors, and fly-in fly-out workers who are transient by nature. There is no deep established owner-occupier culture to anchor prices during downturns. When a project finishes or a defence posting ends, whole streets of properties simultaneously come to market. ANZ's forecast for 2026 projects: Darwin's market to slow sharply in late 2026 and early 2027, following a similarly sharp expected slowdown in Brisbane and Perth. The high-yield tropical promise tells you exceptional rental returns in Australia's defence and resources capital, but the 51% of suburbs declining and the recent city-wide falls deliver a market that has always rewarded patience with volatility rather than stability, and is currently doing exactly that again. And the final suburb on our list is perhaps the most subtle trap of all, because it is the one being actively marketed to the exact buyers who can least afford to get it wrong. Number 12. Outer Melbourne apartment developments, adjacent to train stations, Victoria. This final entry is not a single suburb. It is a property type found across dozens of postcodes simultaneously, from Ringwood to Dandenong to Sunshine, and it represents the most systematic trap currently operating in Victoria's market. These are the 5 to 10-storey apartment blocks being built directly adjacent to train stations across Melbourne's middle and outer ring, marketed specifically to first home buyers as the smart, affordable, transit-connected alternative to inner-city pricing. They look great on the surface, close to public transport, new build, developer incentives available, below inner-city median prices. But the structural problems are consistent and documented across multiple sites. First, they are being built into a market where Victoria's land tax changes have permanently damaged the investor-buyer pool. When these buyers eventually want to sell, who is buying? Another first-home buyer who wants a brand-new unit, not a 4-year-old one competing with the current developer stock. Second, many of these sites are being delivered by developers who are operating under extreme financial pressure as construction costs have surged. The quality control issues being discovered in these buildings post-settlement are generating a growing wave of defect claims, owner corporation disputes, and special levy ambushes that are landing on buyers who entered the market specifically because they wanted a financially manageable property. Third, these are predominantly 1- and 2-bedroom units in locations where families, the core of resale demand, cannot comfortably live. The transit-oriented development marketing promises smart, connected, affordable living in Melbourne's most strategic locations. But the investor exodus, the defect risk, and the resale competition with developer stock reveal a product being sold into the most difficult market conditions for high-density residential in the country, to buyers with no margin for error if the fundamentals deteriorate further. Now look across all 12 of these markets simultaneously. Notice the pattern. Every single one is showing the same collection of warning signs. Either there is structural oversupply, where new product constantly undercuts resale value, or there is a legislative change that has eliminated the investor-buyer cohort, or there is a single industry economic base that is structurally fragile, or there is an aging building stock generating escalating holding costs, or there is a pandemic premium that has reversed as the underlying economics reassert themselves. Or there is a ceiling on borrowing capacity that means the buyer who should purchase your property simply cannot get the loan. In the most alarming cases, more than one of these factors is operating simultaneously, and the whole time the headlines are telling you the market is booming. The real estate agents in these suburbs are still conducting weekend auctions with confident vendor guides. The developer display villages are still handing out free coffee and glossy brochures, Because the property industry's survival depends on your continued confidence, and your financial future depends on your willingness to look past the confidence and into the data. Now let us talk about where the data actually supports buying right now. If you want to protect your capital and position yourself for genuine growth over the next decade, there are 3 specific property strategies that the data consistently supports. Option 1. Established middle ring houses in Brisbane and Adelaide. The most powerful underlying driver of long-term property value is population growth combined with genuine housing scarcity, and both of these exist in abundance in Brisbane and Adelaide right now. Brisbane's annual price growth sits at close to 19%. Driven by the Olympics precinct investment, interstate migration, and a fundamental undersupply of detached housing relative to demand. Adelaide is growing at 11.4% annually, with a stable economy, a major defence and technology investment pipeline, and housing stock that still represents genuine value relative to Sydney and Melbourne wages. Established houses in the middle ring suburbs of both cities, within 30 kilometres of the central business district on decent blocks of land, represent the clearest risk-adjusted opportunity in Australia right now. Option 2. Diverse regional cities with multiple economic engines. The collapse of single industry towns like Moranbah and the pandemic reversal in small Victorian regional towns tells you the most important thing about regional property. You need an economy with multiple legs. Cities like Geelong, which is not purely dependent on Melbourne commuters, but has its own growing healthcare, education, defence and technology sector, present a fundamentally different risk profile to Kyabram or Moranbah. Geelong suburbs like Lara, Belmont and North Geelong are showing strong rental yields of 4 to 5% and are forecast to benefit from major infrastructure investment and population growth. The key question for any regional purchase is simple. If the primary industry in this town disappeared tomorrow, would there still be a reason for people to live here? Option 3. Older boutique apartment blocks with strong land value. If you are buying an apartment anywhere in Australia, the single most important data point is the land-to-building ratio. A 12-apartment block in an established suburb, built in the 1960s or 1970s on a generous block of land, has something that a 60-story tower in Docklands will never have: genuine underlying land value. When the building eventually reaches the end of its life, the land it sits on is worth something independently. There is always a developer for whom that land is valuable. That exit strategy creates a price floor that high-density towers in oversupplied precincts simply do not have. Australia's property culture taught an entire generation that the words bricks and mortar were a complete investment strategy in themselves. That buying anything, anywhere, at any price was ultimately justified by the idea that it would all go up in the end. But the data confirms, suburb by suburb, postcode by postcode, that the market has now fundamentally split. In some cities and some streets, that belief is still being rewarded. In the 12 markets we have covered today, holding that belief without examining the data could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 2 years. Do not buy the belief, buy the data. Check the strata records before you sign. Understand the land tax implications for your state before you buy an investment property. Map the approved development pipeline in any suburb where you are considering a unit purchase. And ask yourself honestly, who is the buyer who will want to purchase this property from me in 2028? If you cannot confidently answer that question, you have your answer. If this video gave you information that changes how you evaluate your next property decision, tap the like button so we can get this in front of every Australian buyer who deserves to see the data before they sign anything. If you want to stay ahead of the market, the lending conditions, the legislative shifts, and the suburb-level data that separates genuine opportunity from expensive wishful thinking, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are watching this market every week. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you own property in any of the 12 markets we covered today? Are you seeing listings pile up, days on market blowout, or auction clearance rates collapse in your local area? Drop your suburb in the comments below, because the more specific data we can map, the better picture we can all build together. This video is for general information and commentary purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or property investment advice. All statements refer to publicly available market data, banking forecasts, and research reports at the time of production. Property markets are complex and localized. Viewers should conduct their own due diligence and seek licensed professional advice before making any property decision.